Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Tree Action, the Human Forestry Podcast. And with me, as always, is my trusted co-host, sidekick, and partner, Tony Trestle. How's it going, Tony?
Going pretty well. Hello, everyone.
Hello. And joining us on a bit of a vacay from somewhere up in New York, I believe, on a nice from an outdoor venue. You may hear the birds in the background. Matt Reynolds, welcome to the show, Matt.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Well, we're excited to have you on the show because we've had brothers on before. So we've had both of the Chisholm brothers, Mark and Steve, but now we've had Tim on, and now we're having his brother Matt. So it makes we were talking about earlier. We've had two sets of brothers on the show now. Matt, we start the show with a simple question with everybody, and that is this: could you think back and share with us your first memory where you felt a connection to trees or a tree?
Yeah, I mean, I'm from the New England area, so I pretty much grew up in the woods. It's if I always say that if you leave a piece of land alone, it's going to be a forest eventually. So I grew up. I remember it was in Katona, New York. Massive oaks in the front yard and big sugar maples in the back. But I think one of the first thoughts that comes to mind is my oldest brother. There was like a wild grapevine hanging from one of the maples in the back, and there was a stone wall in the garage. And I remember him and his friends used to swing on this grapevine from the stone wall, which at that point seemed like, hundreds of feet. It's probably 10, but from the stone wall back and forth, from the garage back to the stone wall. And I tried it, and, and I think I was just amazed that I don't know how complex my thought was, but just that a tree could offer me this. And it's just always been something about walking around the woods. And my family, another big one would be my family. I have 3 brothers, Tim, and my family, all we did was camp for vacation, which I now realize is probably one of the cheapest ways for them to get out with 4 boys. But, so we were always in the woods, the Catskills, things like that. But yeah, I don't know if that answers the question.
It's interesting, when you mentioned vines, grapevine, because I've always found it interesting with Harris's book, because he calls it arboriculture. And then he mentions, I can't remember specifically, but arboriculture, I think the care and practice of like the caring of trees, shrubs, and vines, I think is what it says somewhere in the title of Richard Harris's book.
Huh.
And he talks very specifically mentions vines, which I always found that interesting because where I'm from, vines aren't really a thing, but I've seen where there's vines that are like, holy cow, like they're real things. Like you guys were hanging and swinging off them, right? Like that's, I know you were younger, but still that's a substantial load, treating it like a rope. Obviously probably where the first concept of rope came from, right? Is from vines.
Right. Yeah. I don't know. I would do the same thing today. That's for sure. It's cool too that you mentioned that because, it's really interesting that his book is titled that way because just recently you start looking at trees and how they grow and what they grow and what's going around them. It's more of like a holistic approach. Yeah. I was just talking to a gentleman that had worked at the New York Botanical Gardens forever, and he was even talking about starting to look at Deadwood as like a good thing in a tree. And so, I've been so conditioned as in my career that like, that's one of the first things we're trying to get out of this tree. And, and then the idea that, wow, maybe there's this whole other ecosystem happening on these things, it's been really exciting lately because it's just changing the way I look at tree work altogether.
Yeah, I think I don't know if it's something that happens with age, but I know I definitely view it so much differently. And it's quite interesting. I had a guy that started work for us. I'm still friends with him. Actually should get him on the show. And he came to work for us, and he was a pretty good climber and a good arborist. But we had this thing on this company I was at where we did class one everything. We didn't mess around. Like if you hired us, it was being done perfect. Like we didn't
Right.
have a level or a gradation. Drove the salesman nuts because he's like, I didn't price that for. It's like, you know what? We do it. We just did it always, and every piece of Deadwood, right? Like you're talking about.
Yeah.
And I remember Gord would be like, well, like, some of it's not even hurting anything, and it's not like really. And we would make him. He was just blown away at how detailed we'd get at all the little Deadwood pieces of Deadwood, right? And he's like, it's not hurting nothing. It's not going to fall and hurt anybody. It might even be habitat, and this conversation. And I had no place for it. I was like, nope, Deadwood goes. Serves no function. And I was just very, I don't know. I was almost obstinate or belligerent about it. Now it's like, ain't hurt nothing. When very much that viewpoint, and I don't view it as not doing my job. I view it as, it just isn't, and it's not hurting anything. And maybe even if it's doing some good. I also remember when Brian French, got on the ANSI, he got a voice, he got to sit in on the meeting of the ANSI A300 and said, listen, this thing about Deadwood, because was it say cleaning a tree is removing all dead and diseased material. And that's what it said, all dead and diseased. And he was like, but there's dead and diseased material that is habitat for wildlife. And what had happened is the city had come to prune his boulevard where he lived. And there was a nest in a hunk of dead stub. And technically it should go, but he was like, why are you cutting that off? Because the bird's actually living in there. And that's what prompted him to go. And then that's why it's in the answer. They've changed it, right? It doesn't say all. If it's providing habitat, if it's serving a function, if it's not a risk, then you don't remove it, right? It's just interesting how things change.
Well, now that you mention it, that said all, I realize that we've been doing it wrong because I haven't been carving all of the decay material out of hollows, climbing up in there, getting all that, scraping all that stuff out of there. So, I owe a lot of people an apology for telling them I got all the Deadwood out, and not doing it at all. So, yeah.
I mean, Tony, you've been in the biz a long time. Have you noticed a trend at that all with yourself or with your company?
Yeah, there's definitely a fine line between doing it because it's, no target, no hazard, of course, is a very real thing. There's a thing between doing it because that's the best thing for the tree. And then there's a thing just being a lazy son of a bitch and not climbing out there and getting that stick of Deadwood, which, you run into. Oh, I don't have to go out there and get that piece of Deadwood. And I'm like, yeah, you do. Yeah. Well, it doesn't matter for Mother Nature. It's like, yeah, Mother Nature ain't signing your check, son. But so there is definitely that. But I think it was misrepresented for the longest time. Like one of the first things I tell new arborists when they're training to climb and prune. Well, to me, it's the same thing because we don't happen to prune trees because we're climbing around them. It's like the first thing to remember about pruning is a tree doesn't need you. The tree doesn't need pruned. It just does not. It doesn't need you. It's fine. It will do what it'll do. It'll fall. The branches will fall off. It will move on through its life cycle, totally irrespective of you. We're pruning it because we need it to be pruned. And there has to be that balance between meeting the tree's needs and meeting, the human needs. And the ultimate scale of that is when the one side of the spectrum is removal. The other side is don't do anything. And it's gotta fall somewhere in between there. And the decision should be made not on the quality, not on the amount of work or labor you have to put into it, but what's the overall best need for the tree, right? Because you could say the tree doesn't need to be deadwooded, but if it has deadwood dropping on people's cars in a parking lot, somebody's going to cut it down. So isn't it better for the tree to remove the deadwood?
Yeah. I always say that my new thing, and I think I got it from my old boss when I lived out in California, was just kind of helping people and trees live together.
Yeah.
Occupy the same space. Because I think about it all the time when I walk in the woods. I mean, I'm in the woods now. This property that I'm on has a bunch of old oak trees, white oaks in particular, which are one of my favorites. And these trees are doing just fine. It's like, you go to any of the old ancient groves, or if you ever see old growth, those things have lived for however long. and they have Deadwood on them. They'll have hollows. They go through fire. So nature figured it out long before we ever got involved.
Yeah.
But we also put trees in places that they wouldn't normally be. So, it's just finding that balance of just helping everybody get along.
I had a friend that was this company's logo or slogan was people and trees growing together.
Yeah.
And, I remember when I taught at the college, arboriculture, it was something I would say is, arboriculture isn't just caring for trees. When you're out there practicing it, you're trying to care for the people and the trees, right? And making that blend and that connection, and doing what's best for both, right? Because, urbanization and, the whole concept of urban forest, even the human forest, right? Like it's a misnomer really. Like, I remember Shigo would talk about the term urban forestry and he would kind of laugh because apparently it's an oxymoron. Like urban and forest just aren't the same. Like it doesn't make any sense at all. And he quipped about how they were having a meeting and someone made a comment, well, maybe we should call it the urban forest. And, lo and behold, it ended up being a thing, because that's very common term. In fact, I think at UBC where DJ went to school, it was an urban forestry I think it was called an urban forestry degree, which is just crazy. But it is that blending, right? And that's the real art and science of tree work, right? Of arboriculture is making that connection fit. And, there's clearances, there's obstacles that wouldn't exist in the forest, like power lines and cars and pedestrians, and it's making it all fit so it works best with everybody. Yeah, I think when you understand that, you excel at tree work, and you excel as a company owner or as a company person in particular, because if you can make your customers happy and the trees look good, you're going to win.
Yeah, there's a weird line with that too, because I've been doing this for probably a little over 20 years now, and I've had great opportunity. I started in Connecticut and then worked my way out to California, and I was out there for 6 or 8 years and got to do some real big stuff with redwoods and eucalyptus and stuff. But I almost find, and maybe it's just because more of being a business owner now, but I've been really struggling, helping people and trees get along. And then all the things that is involved with that, I've been struggling with burnout, of just feeling like I'm overextending myself sometimes with those kind of things. And it's been, it's been a little bit of a challenge, but I also find too that one of my mentors, one of the things that always stuck with me is that when they go look at work, they're not going to sell a job. They're going to interview a client, and they turn down more work than they take.
Right.
And I was always amazed by that, but they kind of pick the people to do the work that they like to do, and which in turn keeps them kind of happier. Which I think it takes a while to get to that level, but I always thought that was really, and that's sort of where I am now, is trying to pick my spots a little bit more.
Well, it's an interesting concept. It reminds me of, I don't remember where I was. I believe it was in South Dakota. I was doing something at a conference there. And a guy made a comment about the free estimates that are done in the tree world, right? And he called them bottom feeder tree service, right? He said, what sense does it make to go to see if you can be the cheapest guy? Because when you're doing free estimate, this was his explanation, right? And it really stuck with me. And I thought I would be clever because I had started a tree company. I was like a typical tree guy. I was working at a tree company, but I had a little thing on the side. And I was clear about it. I didn't tell the boss. The boss knew, and he's like, "Look, don't solicit my clients, and we'll get along." And it was understood. So I'll just make that statement now for those. I don't encourage you to start your own thing without your boss knowing. But
I'll just encourage you not to do it in the first place.
What happened was, though, I was getting a lot of work, right, and I didn't want the work because it was interfering with my job. So I thought I'd get smart and I would start charging for my estimates. So that way I would weed out people. This was my thinking, right? So when people would call it, say, well, there's a charge. I can't remember. It was nominal. This is like in the early 90s, right? So it was like 25 or $50. I can't remember. And I even went so far as to say, I'll put it towards the invoice. Like if you take the work, then I'll I'll just apply it to the job. But if you don't take the job, I'm still like, I've got time and gas and money. Like it costs me, I can't just go for free. So and people would say, what? I'm not paying you to come look at my trees. Okay, fine. Which was what I was hoping would happen. But what I found ended up happening is people would say, yeah, no problem. I got every job like that because they were people that really were interested in having tree work done. And it backfired. But, for something like a removal or whatever, I didn't do it. But, so often you go and, well, this is what you should do. And this tree's out. What kind of tree is this? Oh, and you give them a whole bunch of really good information. But have you ever thought about that or even turned clients down? Like I remember doing that too. Like there's guys, I want the tree topped. I want it cut in half. And I know people are going to do it, but I'm just like, you know what? I'm just not going to do that. I'm just not going to do that. And so I didn't. But it's interesting, the whole how you get customers.
I've said this, I think, too many times, and I'm always like, man, what am I putting out? But I've always said that I never wanted to be a business owner in the tree world. Everybody I ever worked for, it wasn't a life that I was like, wow, that's what I want. And in fact, it encouraged me, like, I'm totally happy being an employee. But it just sort of worked out that way. I moved back to Connecticut in 2010 and I couldn't get a job because it was like right after everything tanked. Then I became a subcontract climber. And then I was like, well, I don't want to make a career out of just dealing with everybody else's nightmares every day. So then I started buying equipment and, here I am. But I've never advertised. I've never, I've definitely gone and give estimates for other people they've had other companies, but 99% of all the work we do is word of mouth. And, so we have a referral usually. So it's more just don't screw it up kind of thing when you show up. But I've thought about charging for my time, to go do that. But, I build relationships with all these people and then for some reason, maybe because I don't value my own time enough, I feel guilty, doing that.
I'd say,
even thing with the deposit part of it, I know lots of people that now they won't even put you on the calendar unless you've given a 50%, deposit.
Right.
And, it's like, I don't know how I go to people I've been working for a decade and say, hey, we're doing deposits now before I can schedule you or, so it's, I have the relationship part with my clients and that's actually the part I enjoy the most, but the business side and the business savvy, is the part where I'm probably not as up to snuff as I could be for sure.
I totally relate. I was the worst estimator or pricer or quoter or whatever you call it. I loved the trees and talking to the people, and the nicer they were, the lower the price got. And the nicer the tree was, the lower the price got. And the guys would just hate me. And I realized I couldn't price jobs. I was not good at it because I wanted to climb the tree so bad and work in it that I'd do it almost for free if they asked. And I probably would, but the one thing about charging it was like, once I knew someone and they were a client, then that I never worried about it anymore. And even if I think the down payment and charging for your time is good because what I did find is it really got rid of people that were just looking for the cheapest price. They didn't really want someone that cared for their trees. They just wanted something cheap, like especially in the case of like removals. But once I had a client and, then I was the kind of arborist that when I drive by and notice something in their yard, I'd stop. I'd be in their yard even on unscheduled, like in between visits, I'd stop in and say, oh man, I just noticed you got a bit of a caterpillar infestation here. We might want to give a treatment of some bacillus here. Just, I didn't, there's, and they'd say, yeah, go ahead. Sure. And I have some clients that'd be like, whatever you see, you driving by, you see something, you just get it done. And I had clients where I would just, sometimes be in the yard 4 or 5 times a year because they were on a route that I would see regularly,
Yeah. Yep. I had one where I worked for a property manager, and she kind of oversees all these properties for these very wealthy folks. And she's like, I want you to go and just check out this property and tell me what you see there. And I'd never been there before. And it was in a very rural spot. You couldn't see neighbors, anything like that. It's a long driveway. And I got to the house and I was walking around, and all of a sudden a bird flew by me and flew into the front door. And the front door creaked open. And I was like, that's really weird. And I kid you not. And in like under 5 minutes, cops were ripping up the driveway. And like nobody's home,
Whoa.
So I'm like scrambling to call her as they're driving up the driveway, like, just so you know, the cops are here. I don't know what to say. The door's open. The front door's open. The cops are here. It wasn't me. I might need you to vouch for me, everything else. And,
a bird flew into the door.
So, yeah. So, and they were, at first they asked me a lot of questions. What are you doing here? All that kind of stuff. And, and I wasn't even, because no one was going to be there, I wasn't even wearing my company apparel. I was like in flip flops and like cargo shorts, like I had like a ripped stained shirt because I'd been working on something. So it wasn't even, I didn't even look the part. I was just some hippie walking around their yard, and a bird flew into the door. It wasn't me.
That's where the cops got to be like, well, this is either true or he's the best liar ever, because like the truth is odder than fiction, right? Like, who can make that up? I was just standing here. I was supposed to look at the trees, and this bird flew into the door, and it opened. You need to come down to the station with us, son.
But that stuff's kind of fun. I mean, the other story I always loved was looking with, clients will always ask you like, hey, what do you think about that tree over there? And you're like, I don't know. It looks happy to me. And they're like, well, so we don't have to worry about it. I'm like, that thing could stand there till we're all dead and buried, or it can fall over in the next 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And I said that a client pointed at a tree out on the wood line in the front yard. My brother Tim was there. And I said, same spiel. What do you think about that tree? I'm like, that thing looks fine from here. I mean, I didn't walk up to it or, walk around the crown, examine the basal flare or anything like that. But I just from the distance, it wasn't going to fall on anything. I was like, it looks fine, and I was like, it could stand here forever. It could fall over the next 5 minutes. Within 30 seconds, the tree fell over.
No.
Yeah. And like, we all just stood there in stunned silence. And then after a few seconds, I broke the silence. I was like, that'll be $500. But
they're a client for life. He's like, this dude, man, he called it.
Yeah. I was like, well, I said it could, it's.
Wow. I remember I was taking my first chainsaw course from Tim Ard, and we were standing, he was talking about hope and hazards, obstacles, planning equipment. And, he said, trees are shedding organisms. They drop branches all the time. And, you don't wear your hard hat, or you aren't aware. And right as he said it, you heard a crack and a big crash, and like 10 feet behind him, a limb fell off a tree and hit the ground. Right when he said it, it was like, wow. And there's a couple guys that didn't have their hard hats on yet. They were kind of there for class or whatever, right? And you saw them, like, everybody reach for their hat and put them on. And he said, if you're in the woods, anything can happen at any time, and it's true.
You're not running a tree company now, are you, Dwayne?
No. When you are an arborist, as you well know, it's like, my son's ex-girlfriend's parents called me the other day. We got this tree. It's the one in our yard. Could you go, and it needs it's got a dead top in it. It's a big spruce, and it just needs to have the top removed. And so you get asked to go look at stuff all the time still. And I do. I'll still go and, look. And there's one of Zach's friends has a tree company that he's kind of started on the side when he's home. And, I just throw the work to him. But sometimes I'll go do it myself even. You can't, I think it's like plumbers, drywallers, chiropractors. I don't know about dentists, but if people know you do it, they're going to ask you questions.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I was curious because it seems, I know a little bit more of Tony's backstory, and it's just what moves you on from that. What brought the transition in your life from full-time tree guy to, I know you're both were huge and are huge in the training world, but like what happens that generates that transition for you?
It's kind of like that tree standing for the next 100 years or falling over in the next 5 minutes. For me, I ended up, I started at university. I thought I wanted to go into phys ed and maybe be a phys ed teacher or something. I didn't know what the hell I wanted to do. And I realized after a year at university, living in a house with 5 guys and, just having a hell of a fun life. And, it was basically a life support system for a party. I just thought I'm going to I had roommates that had been 6 years of university and still didn't know what they were going to do. And I'm like, I'm going to be exactly like that. So I just packed up and I ended up a year later, I went to Colorado and kind of ski bummed a while and hung out. That's where I ended up meeting my current wife, but I didn't marry her then. But anyways, I ended up at a lawn company in Calgary doing liquid lawn fertilizer, kind of like a ChemLawn thing. And I had my own little truck and it was kind of fun. But they had this tree division they just started. And while I was at university, I worked on grounds and I'd learned Latin and I'd learned a bit of pruning and stuff. So the tree guys were like, oh, you worked with those guys at the nursery? Because they knew these old fellas that I worked with at the nursery because the tree were all small. So fall came, I got laid off, and the tree division was for long-term employees, and I was only a new hire. But one of the guys didn't want to go to school. I got sent to school. They asked me, you want to go to college? And I was like, college. But they said, you'll be in the tree department and you'll be full-time. And I'm like, okay. And one of the classes we took was arboriculture class at this landscape horticulture apprenticeship school. And I was like, this is really awesome. And plant ID, I was nailing it because I learned Latin at the tree nursery at the University of Saskatchewan because I worked there. And all they did is talk in Latin. It wasn't, because it was the university. So all of a sudden I'm getting good grades. I'm doing all right, getting good grades. Future's so bright I had to wear shades. So, and then I graduated from there with really good marks. And one of the teachers said, hey, we got this off-campus course. You'd be good at teaching it maybe. You like to talk and you got good grades. I'd never, ever considered being an instructor in my life. I had never thought about it, but I had been coaching wrestling and I'd been involved with high school coaching and so on. But I never made the connection. So I took this job in the winter teaching on a contract, and that was it. That was the first time in my life where I really knew what I wanted to do. I mean, I love doing tree work, and I did it for 4 or 5 years, and I ended up as a manager at a tree company and running a couple crews and then ended up teaching and then realized I want to be a teacher. And I worked on contract for the college while I was running a tree company. I ran a large tree spray and small pruning company in Calgary, a $5 million operation. And then ended up getting full-time at the college. And that was the end of it for me. And it was completely coincidental. It wasn't planned until I taught that first teaching contract. I knew right then what I wanted to be in my life. Up until that point, I had no clue. And it's just circumstantial that it all went that way. Although I have to look back on it and think maybe there's a little providence involved. So like most of us, it's kind of by accident, I think. A lot of... Yeah, go
maybe. Ahead. I was going to say, it's hard not to think that there's, I don't know what you can call it, but there's some kind of guiding force with all of that.
Yeah. I agree.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's hopefully I didn't talk too long on that. I have a tendency to drag stories out. I hope I said that rather succinctly, but yeah. And I've never, the funny thing I've realized too, Tim, is I've never done anything but trees, whether it be working in trees or teaching trees. I've always been in trees since high school, like since I graduated high school. And what ended up happening is I went to the U of S, and the head of the grounds department, his son was on the wrestling team. So all the wrestlers got jobs on campus. And
Mm.
I got stuck in the tree nursery, and I was a little miffed because I wasn't, on campus with everybody. But there are these two old nurserymen out there, and it was off campus about a couple miles, and it was a beautiful spot. I still go visit it to this day, and I'm still friends with the guys that are alive still. And I go when I'm ever in Saskatoon, I go check out the nursery. It's pretty cool. And yeah, I think it was meant to be somehow.
Mm. Yeah, that's awesome. Because I always wonder. It's sort of, for me, because I started a company and had employees and everything else. You know, your story sounds amazing because it was basically like opportunities came up and you were able to say yes. And you're always, it's like, oh, yeah, sure, I could take another job. And I sometimes feel trapped a little bit because it's like, I've built this thing.
Yeah.
That now, I tell myself other people are dependent on me. I have employees and, client base and all that kind of stuff. And you almost start to feel like the walls close in a little bit where you don't have the freedom to say yes to those things as much as you used to.
Yeah.
And I'm exploring that a little bit now, what that could look like or might look like. But yeah, that's an awesome story. Thanks, Dwayne.
You're welcome. It is interesting how we choose our lives, right? It's I have to say I had people in my life that picked up the areas of the business, like as the training company grew. My wife, took on the role of manager and logistics and stuff. So I continued to pursue strictly training and my passion there, and I couldn't have done that, right? Whereas I see a lot of my friends, they'll get into, and a lot of people that start their own tree company because it makes sense, and it's nice to be your own boss and your own owner, but you end up becoming a businessman or an owner and a manager of people, and you're not an arborist so much anymore. You're an arborist that does that kind of work, and you the people that are working for you are the ones that are doing what you used to love to do, and
Yeah.
it's a fine line, and I hear it often with owners that's like, man, I got into this because I love trees, and now I'm just a business guy. But Tony,
Yeah,
you've navigated that deftly, I find, because you've always
Yeah, to an extent. Well, I mean, I've been as close to owning a tree business as you can possibly be without owning a tree business through my brother and sister-in-law.
right.
So I've been fortunate that I've seen, up close and personal a lot of those decisions. Because I kind of remember the day, like my brother, very much the same thing you did. Like he just was working with tree companies, and he just like they would lay him off in the winter, and it was just he's like, well, I can do this better. If I'm gonna go through all this pain and suffering, I might as well own my own business. And he started it. But there was a day when he, had to sit down and make a decision: is he going to be a tree climber or a business owner? And he chose business owner. And it's but it was a decision he had to make. But I was fortunate that I was able to see through their eyes what it's like to own a business. And I would, it's owning a business is great until you get employees. Then it just goes fucking downhill. But but so I never wanted to see it.
So
but in
true.
my own career, I'd been in arboriculture long enough in my father's experience. I'd never wanted to be that guy that was 60 years old, was still doing the work. Yeah, he still liked it on good days, but mostly he was doing the work because it was the only way he knew how to make a paycheck. Because I'd seen so many people end up in that trap, right? Like, well, this, I can't get a new career at 55, And I mean, you can make any change, but it's hard to make those changes. So I structured my career pretty much my theory was always and I didn't really make a decision until I was about 28. My theory was to get paid for what I did with my hands till I was about 40. And then after 40, get paid for what I knew. And I was able to do that. And for me, the transition was into more training, out of the day-to-day production into the more full-time training. But there was a good 4 or 5 month period there where it's like I didn't want to do the day-to-day production anymore because I could see complacency, creeping into my own work. And I know the results of that in this industry. So I had to sit down and had a long talk with my brother and my sister-in-law and, said, look, it's either I make a change. I have to make a change. And I don't know if that change is within the industry or if I leave it and find something else to do, reinvent myself somehow. I was fortunate enough to have connections, Dwayne being one of them, Scott Profit to be another one, where I could start to turn that corner and go more into training and less into production. Because I've always loved teaching. It was a lot of the accumulation of my arborist skills were so that someday I could teach them. So I was able to do that. There's a lot of methods to that, right? There's a lot of paths to that mastery. I think what you're saying, a lot of people get into the business end of it, become a business owner. Now they're in that trap. I think you could have a good plan around it. I don't know what it is. I think it would be a wonderful topic to have at a professional arborist conference. Like, how do you grow a business and then sell it, make your money, but not sell to one of the big three? How do you build a business, grow it, and then don't be trapped by it? I think there's ways to do it. I don't know what they are. I'm just a tree guy, not enough of a businessman.
Well, I notice a lot of people. It's like it's magnitude. I think what are you willing to grow to, like, because growth, how you manage growth, I think, is a big part of it. If you continue strive for growth, then you move the goalposts, rather than set them in stone. And when you've achieved that goal and having a clear idea what that is, then this is where, because I know for me, I've always found if your company isn't growing, then it's declining, kind of thing. And I think there is a place for a company to be a size and maintain that size, and your quality of living, it fits within that, and your lifestyle fits within that. And this is what, you maintain it at a range that affords you what you want. And if you need more income, well, then you're looking at raising the business, but then with that, other things have to be sacrificed, like maybe your time in the trees or whatever. But I don't know. It's an interesting.
I think there's.
I've seen guys sell. I've seen guys sell to the big three and start their small little. I know two guys in particular. One guy is well into his retirement, and he has a truck and a trailer and some climbing gear and some pruning tools, and he is out gamefully doing work for people. Nothing big, nothing crazy. And he said, Dwayne, I'm absolutely loving it. I'm doing what I did when I started my business. And he had a pretty substantial business. And now he just does small jobs here and there and loving life. But he retired with that sale, right? So he doesn't have to make his income from that little truck and trailer, but he went back to it. And I know a couple guys that have done that.
Yeah, it's the thought that I've been ruminating in my head a lot recently is I remember the first time that I worked with professional tree workers, tree climbers. And I actually, the very first day, working for a tree company, they actually put me in a tree under intense supervision, because everything that they did, back to the Deadwood pruning, was Deadwood pruning. Right. So if you can't climb a tree, they wanted to know right away whether you're going to be comfortable up there or not, because they weren't going to invest all this time.
Right.
And it was a phenomenal group of some of the best climbers to this day that I've ever had to work around, that I learned from. But I remember the first month or two, I was just astonished that I was getting paid to do this. Just be up in this. I'm like, it was almost like tickle me. Like, I'm getting paid right now to climb this tree.
Yeah.
And, I've noticed that, through circumstances and choices of my own and life and everything else, I've come to a point where I feel so far removed from that aspect of it, with everything else that's involved. So it's, payroll and taxes and insurance. And then, I always tell, you always tell people that you're really a full-time mechanic, part-time tree guy. You're always fixing something. It doesn't matter if it's brand new, it's broken. But, and then now I have a family and I don't mean to sound like I'm whining, but it's just the things that, drive you, and the choices that you feel like you have to make, whether you really have to make them or not is up for debate. But, it seems like there's so many other things that are involved now, instead of just like, I'm just going to show up today and climb this tree.
Yeah.
And, it's not now, it's like, oh crap, I didn't put enough money on this thing, or, do we really have to get all the 1 inch out of this? They're never going to, so, and then you get into all the ethical parts of that, where it's like, well, they won't know, but I do. Yeah. So it's just an interesting place that I find myself exploring now. And I don't see what the next chapter is.
Right.
But the hope that I have is that I always say 90% of my life has not gone according to any plan that I ever had. And, most of it has turned out better. So I'm holding on to that, and seeing where it goes, kind of thing.
Right. Well, and I think part of it is just normal maturation. It's part of growing up and maturing, and your kids are at an age, and there's just a lot happening, right? You're in a transition phase. We're all transitioning, but your tree is maturing, and there's going to be some branches that were pretty vital at one stage that are now in the understory, and may be shed, and it's just rolling with it. And I think for me also, and I might suggest, is a big part of it is having that flexibility, like you said, not going according to plan, but being open to I guess energetically or spiritually where things are headed. And I think if you have that grounding or that connection with something outside of yourself, something bigger than yourself on an esoteric type level,
Yep.
and a faith in that you'll be guided, and that you're open to wherever that takes you, and listening for that, that's a big part of it too. And you put all sorts of labels and names on that, and sometimes they freak people out. Like if you use the God word, or heaven forbid the J word, right? That'll really get people going. But whatever it
Sure.
is for you, I think we need that part of it. And I think a lot of people find that in trees. Like that's one of the things about trees is they find that a spiritual type connection that they can't quite explain.
Yeah, it is true. I mean, I find most trees I've ever been in, I talk to, and, a lot of times it's like, this is going to hurt, but it's for the best, kind of thing. Or, I mean, I or the ones we're removing, I'm apologizing or thanking them for their time that they've given, kind of thing. It's really interesting. You're talking about that. I remember years ago, I used to go to the CTPA meetings all the time, and there was a booth. There's tons of vendors, everything, and there was a booth there of a fella, and I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but he was called the Tree Whisperer. You would actively watch every arborist at this convention avoid that booth like it was like nobody wanted to talk to this guy, but he would still show up year in and year out, and I remember going and having conversations with him, and it was really intriguing, basically being able to identify energy levels in plants and being able to interpret them, that these trees are actually telling you what they need or what they're struggling with.
Yeah.
And I could see how it seemed kind of like woo-woo and everything else, but I was still like, I was still just really intrigued. So I talked to him a lot, and he gave me his contact info to come to one of his workshops, and I ended up chickening out, and I never followed up on that. But I've been asking a lot of questions lately of like, what are we doing with the trees? What's our relationship with the trees? All this kind of stuff. I've been having these thoughts and like putting those questions out there. And this gentleman came back to mind. And I was thinking about him a couple weeks ago. And then I was digging around the closet in my house, and I found his book. I totally forgot I had it. So I started reading through this book, and I was like, man, this is wild stuff. So then I was up, I kept asking him, like, am I supposed to pursue this? What is this? So then I was up at a client's who's a real great guy. And I was, I do this neem treatment for emerald ash borer up here. He has one ash tree. So I was up there treating the tree, and he comes out and talks. He was in the middle of meditating, and he stopped his meditation to come out and chat with me. And I was he's asking what's going on in life. And I was telling him about this tree whisperer guy. And he's like, I know him. I totally know him. So he sent me his contact info, to contact the guy. And apparently he's an engineer, but I still I had a couple other things put on my plate, so I haven't reached out to the gentleman yet. But I was like, man, what is the universe is pointing me in a direction here, which is really interesting. But I think that's really a fascinating thing of, of course, everything is energy. Plants use energy, they transform energy. So the idea of being able to even read that and interpret it in a way, whether there was anything monetary attached is still just completely fascinating to me that could be a possibility.
I agree. And I remember I've been to a few CTPA meetings myself over the years. And I believe I remember that guy. and he did suffer a lot of ridicule. And I in a way, maybe he was ahead of his time, or maybe there were people that were at that place, because it's funny how it seems less woo woo these days than it did back then. But
For
um,
sure.
I'd be curious let me know how that goes, because I'd be interested in having a chat with him. Was the book called? I wonder if he still has it.
I think it's called Tree Whispering. To be honest, it was and it basically had photos and diagrams of how all the energy fields work and everything else.
Wow.
But I just thought it was just the synchronicity or the serendipity of how all of that worked. I was asking questions, then find this book that had been sitting in there for 5-6 years, sitting in a closet. To the very next day, running into talking with somebody that I don't see that often. It's like, oh, I know him, and then getting his contact info. And it was kind of, as I'm asking all these questions, I was like, geez, So I'm interested to see what becomes of everything with that.
Yeah.
So,
Hey, I want to circle back a little bit. You mentioned working your first job with a bunch of awesome climbers and so on, and they put you up in a tree right away, which, also, what an experience to have that, to really set the hook in tree work, right? Like you talk about, having a heck of an experience to right off the hop. But do you remember what they put you on? Do you remember your rope, your knot, your hitch, your harness?
It was a very, very large hickory. It was over 100 feet. And they were deadwood pruning this thing. And I went up. I had to go up on mar bars. So,
Oh,
so
wow.
it was. I want to say it was, if I remember correctly, they said it was moving rope system. So it's you're going up on two each end of the line, but it was up on mar bars. Which I don't think I've ever used them again, and have no intention, of using those things ever again.
Don't come climbing with me, man.
And then but it was, and then they basically set me up with, it was probably, I think it was a distal, with just a little CMI micro pulley underneath at the time. They didn't. It was interesting. They didn't actually ever have me try a Blake's or anything like that, which is something that I actually make everybody that ever worked for me learn how to tie. Whether they continue to use it, I felt like it was a necessary tool in their tool belt. But yeah, it was this big, beautiful hickory. They handed me a pull saw. I think I just kind of blindly swung it around while they were cleaning all the deadwood out of this thing. And I remember my buddy Dan, when I got to the top, we were just talking about this the other day. He just looked at me and he's like, because we're over 70 feet, we were hanging out probably in the 80-foot range, somewhere like that. And as soon as I got up there, he wanted to spook me. So he's like, "Welcome to the death zone." And it's like, "Thanks, pal." But and since then it was, they put me in a tree more often than not, which I know is a very unusual way. Usually you have to drag brush for a year and a half or 2 years before you ever get to throw a harness on, but that was not my experience. Yeah.
That's awesome. Like as far as tying it and everything, how did you, because when you're on mar bars, you're going to have to pull up the lead and pull up the fall of the line and tie a knot. And did it have a splice in it, or how did you terminate? And how
You're
did
asking,
you have to tie your hitch on?
I had no idea what I was doing. I just trusted there was basically a guy that was shadowing me the whole time.
Interesting. Because you could have had the hitch above the mar bars and it could have slid up, and then all you'd have to do is pull up the one end and clip in, and you'd be there. There'd be different ways of doing it quite simply for somebody new. That's interesting.
I don't remember exactly how that whole thing planned out. I just remember they were busy working and I was trying to stay out of the way. When you have 4 climbers, it was a large tree. There's 4 climbers in this tree. So 2 were actually doing the work. 1 was babysitting me. But it really was, when I got down, they're like, "What do you think?" I'm like, "That was amazing. You guys get paid to do this?" And, so they kept me. And the fortunate thing about having 2 phenomenal climbers, Dan was a multi-time New England tree climbing champion. And then Tim was probably the most physically gifted climber that I've ever been around. He could be a little bit of a cowboy at times, but I mean, just as physical skill wise. So it was like the little brother thing. I was just trying to keep up with them so much that, it really, my arc of learning was really steep, really quick. So it was a great experience.
Yeah, sounds like it was awesome. Matt, we call it the Human Forestry Podcast, and oftentimes I ask guests if they can think of any relate any ways that having been a part of the trees and the tree work and the tree world, have you learned any lessons or drawn any parallels in your own personal life or how you live that you would say comes from your time spent with trees?
The one of the things that I've really thought about, just because it's such a wonderful job where your hands are on nature every day in some shape or form, and one of the guys that works for me, we have this conversation all the time about what are humans' purpose here? Like what you could look at any other animal and see how they kind of fit into their environment, right? But you look at humans and it's kind of like, we could go the dark path and how disruptive we are and everything else. But it's like everything else seems to have a reason to being here. So what is ours as far as nature's concerned? And I really have been having the feeling that that we're meant to be stewards. It's like, it's not like we're other than nature. I feel like we're part of it, and we're meant to be here. And the reason that we have the gifts, like the intellect that we have and the bodies we do and the hands that we can use is almost like we're meant to be stewards or shepherds of this environment that we live in. I love the Lord of the Rings growing up. I don't know. And I always remember one of my favorite characters in that was the Ents. And they were the tree shepherds, right? They looked like trees. They'd come alive and, but they were just the stewards of this place. Not to get in the way, but just to kind of, help it along where it needed it. And I feel very strongly for myself, like that's why I'm here. But the other part of it, the beautiful thing about tree work, it's while people do it, to do full scale tree work, you can't really do it alone. And so, you're working on these teams. And some teams are better than other. I've definitely been part of some crews where it was like they were like a special forces unit, of just everybody could do everyone's job kind of thing. Yeah. And stuff gets done, and no one's telling anybody what to do. People just fall in where things need to happen. But from a personal aspect, I travel in the world of masculine energy very easily. I'm a doer. Get out of the way, I'll get it done. But that feminine side of being able to receive, right. You can't do tree work alone. And so it's like, you really can't, for me, learning, I can't get through this life alone. It's very easy for me to kind of sequester myself and step away from other people but I'm constantly reminded that I need others in my life. Obviously, my wife is a big part of that and my children, but just fostering relationships with others, because we all are part of this big team. But for me, even personally, I need that in my life. And so TreeWorks, whenever I think about it, it's like I've always admired the group effort. And then the people, there's some people that come into tree work and you could tell right away that it's not their thing. But other people, I think one of the things that grabs them more than anything is when they see how that unit works. You're like, wow, it's like, yeah, all this equipment and climbing and big stuff happening and everything's different. But it's also like, holy smokes, we accomplished a lot together today. And I think that part that right there grabs people sometimes. But yeah, I back to our earlier conversation, earlier in our conversation, we were talking about transitions and, moving to different parts of life. I think one of the, just remembering that I should not be trying to do any of this alone, is a big thing for me.
Huge. For all of us, and I think to me that's one of the greatest examples that the human forest, the forest gives us is, trees are one of them. Shigo would say trees are one of the most connected organisms on the planet, and I don't know if he says one of, and I would like to think that he would think that humans are too. And that's where he would always say touch trees, and that's an example of the forest helps each other, and it's not just the trees, it's the fungus, it's the insects, it's the undergrowth. Like everything is connected, and we're part of that, and we're all connected, and um, without everything working in harmony or working together, it isn't complete, and you mentioned it, a crew that has everything just right. The soil conditions are just right. There's just enough leaf litter. There's the right fungi. There's the right shade. There's the right trees. There's, it just like when everything's clicking, and it's a beautiful thing to be a part of. And, I don't even know that it's something that we can even necessarily create. If I think the best we can do is be astute enough to realize when we're in it and be present in it and just bask in the times that we have, and knowing you're experiencing it is maybe as close as you can get to heaven on this side.
Yeah, for sure.
Being able to recognize like I'm in this moment where everything is right now. Everything is connected. I'm part of this experience at this moment in time, and just, accept it and enjoy it for what it is. And I think trees are a pretty strong example of that.
It's amazing too, because 9 times out of 10, most of those things come up out of nowhere, or you weren't anticipating anything like that to happen, right? You just realize that you're caught up in it, and just kind of letting go and enjoying the ride and being a part of it and contributing where you can. But so often than not, it's almost like when you do try to create it, you don't have the same results as just being present as you walk through life, and catching those moments. And that could be anywhere. I mean, it could be ordering a coffee in the morning, and all of a sudden it turns into this surreal experience. So, yeah, amazing.
Yep. Awareness is a gift, and it's something to strive for.
The present I always want for Christmas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's been a great conversation, and we're at about that stage where we typically, we're about that time, eh, Tony? Getting there. It's been a pleasure having you on the show, Tony. Anything you sometimes have a final question for our guests? I can't remember in the beginning. I don't know why I just thought of this, Tony, but you would say if you could put something on a billboard or something. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I would always ask people, Matt, if you had the billboard the whole world could read, what would it say?
I don't know. You're supposed to ask that in the beginning and let me think about it the whole time.
Yeah, I know.
Nah, we save the hard questions for later.
Oh, geez. Well, I'll call you later with an answer. You're going to have an editing job already with this one, so yeah.
Okay, that's all right. All right, I'll put it in the show notes if you send me an
perfect.
answer. I'll give you just to show you. I'll give you my answer. My answer says, "Unfucking the world starts with you." That's what my billboard would say.
I'll take that.
There you go. Right. That's what my billboard would say. So you tell me what yours.
I will do.
Yeah, I find it interesting, Matt. You think carefully, and because when I asked the first question at the start, you pondered it and gave it an honest thought, which is nice. I'm not saying that other people don't that answer quick, but you think about it, which is good.
I before I came on here, the one thing that I kept thinking was like, instead of thinking what I'm going to say next, try to actually really listen to what you guys had to say, and just be an active listener. And that's something I've also been aware of in life, is just learning how to listen better, because so often, I find myself, I'm just thinking about what I'm going to say next. and not really hearing whoever I'm talking to. So I appreciate being here. It's fun talking to you both. You both are wonderful. I love having you guys in my life. So thanks for the opportunity.
And well, thank you. We enjoy having you in ours. And, someone said something recently about the podcast that I found interesting was I think it was you, Tony, but it's an opportunity for some people to listen in on a conversation and just eavesdrop on a conversation between people talking about whatever it is we're talking about. And I don't know, it resonated with me. I kind of like that concept, and it's been a great conversation. And I really hope you all out there have enjoyed eavesdropping and listening in.